In this episode of What's Going On with Shipping, what if rail and West Coast ports go on strike? Hi, I'm your host, Adam Coglano. Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. If you're new to the channel, take a second, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. Okay, we are looking at a looming potential railway strike. Although more of the unions have come to tentative agreements, the big union, the union of the railwaymen and the conductors and engineers have not. And we're looking at 12:01 a.m. on Friday, the potential of a strike of all the class one railways across the United States. At the same time, by the way, we're still waiting on a negotiated settlement between the ILWU, the International Longshoremen and Warehouse Union, and that of the Pacific Maritime Association. And rumblings are out there that if railway goes on strike, the West Coast ports could potentially go on strike also. Let's take a look at what that would look like. So as of now, 9 out of the 12 unions have basically established tentative deals. This story from FreightWaves goes into detail and starts talking about this. The National Conference of Firemen and Oilers was the most recent one who jumped into it. And what's interesting about this is they've been able to hash out the wages, this increase, a 24% wage increase during the 5-year period from 2020 to 2024. They're talking about this. This is a key thing. We're seeing the unions making these deals. And again, 9 out of the 12 have done it with the 5 big class one railways. We're talking about Burlington Northern Santa Fe, CSX, Kansas City Southern, Norfolk Southern, and Union Pacific. However, the two ones that are kind of out there that have not reached an agreement are number one, the Sheet Metal, Air, Rail, and Transportation Workers Transportation Division. And I think the one that's the most important here is the Brotherhood of Locomotive Engineers and Trainmen. Those are the engineers that drive the trains. And they're the ones who are arguing not just for a pay increase, but they're talking about quality of life, which is a really important issue. All right. Some of the other stories are out here. We're seeing the railways starting to wind down shipments. They don't want trains out there with hazardous material and loads sitting on rail lines and just abandoned. We saw what happened with trains getting hit in the Alameda corridor coming out of LA and Long Beach not too long ago. So they're already stopping to the freight lines are not accepting new cargo, basically. So they're slowing down, they're winding down their movement. The government's making some contingency plans for the rail shutdown. Again, think about this for a minute. Are your store shelves going to go empty? No, they're not. They will when everybody panics. That's a whole different issue. But they're not going to go barren because the rails aren't moving. But what we are going to see is some potential issues emerge if this goes on for a long period of time. They're estimating $2 billion a day impact. But some issues, for example, are like chlorine getting to water purification plants, the movement of grain to ports for export, or grain to processing plants for manufacture into food. That would have impact down the supply chain stream later, not immediate, but later. But again, one my big concern, not going to lie, is that people are just going to learn about this on Friday and do what we do best as Americans, and that's friggin' panic. And people will run out and buy everything, which is the wrong thing to do at this point. So what they're planning on doing here is I don't know. I'm hoping there's some contingency planning in place here to offset this, but I sincerely doubt it. You can't just like call the military in to operate trains. They don't have that capability. They can't replace the 115,000 railway workers who are potentially going to walk out on this. And I don't think it's all of them going to walk out either. I think if it is, it'll be some of the select unions that do it. Again, Congress is trying, like Congress does at the last minute, like a student trying to get a last minute paper in. They're trying to cram in a piece of legislation to prevent this from happening. I don't think this is going to happen, unfortunately, which means we find ourselves in a position of, okay, how did we get here? And Rachel Premack, who did a great article back in July, I'll have it in the show notes for you, really surmised this up really well. And she did a thread on Twitter the other day that kind of went to this. And it goes back to the 2010s, where these companies started to aggressively begin to cut costs and basically weed down their overhead. And they did that by getting rid of workers. Union Pacific has 12,000 less employees than they do 5 years ago. That is a substantial reduction. And as you're doing that, railroad volumes are increasing, but they didn't hire more staff. Very similar to what we see in ocean shipping, by the way, where the ships get bigger and they're using fewer and fewer workers. Same thing happened. And then you, of course, have to go through COVID on top of this, where railway workers, much like shipyard workers and dock workers and port workers, weren't considered essential. Why the frick does the government not consider these people essential? I have no idea. I don't know what they think is essential beyond themselves, but they don't consider them essential. Add to it an absolute cataclysmic bottoming of morale for railway workers, particularly engineers, who can't have a life because there's fewer workers, they're working longer. They have cut the number of personnel working on each train from 4 to 2. And oh, by the way, we've increased the size of the trains from half a mile to 2 miles long. So, I mean, this is literally everything you can imagine going wrong has gone wrong. And again, what we're seeing here is not so much the pay being the issue, but the quality of life being an issue. Workers want to have family life. They want to be able to get home. They want to be able to get to doctors. They need to be able to do things, and they can't do it if they're always working, and they can't have a dependable schedule. This is one of the things we saw happen with ocean shipping, particularly with the United States. Did a video on the Military Sealift Command. Very similar thing. Add to it, you're going to see impact of Amtrak, because if the railways are jammed with freight cars that aren't moving, that means Amtrak's not going to be able to move. This means that bread, corn, Amazon goods are not going to be able to be moved quickly through the interior of the United States. And we lack the trucking to do this. Trucking cannot pick this up. Remember, trucking just took a downward turn. We've seen bankruptcy of trucking firms. We've seen those startup companies that started go under because there wasn't enough business. Freightwaves, Craig Fuller has been talking about the trucking going down. This means that we're losing trucking. And so we don't have the trucking to pick this up. We don't have the rail to pick this up. This has massive implications. But then I want to throw this other variable into it. The ILWU, the International Longshoremen Warehouse Union, has been without a contract since June 30th. Now, they were basically up for contract renegotiation in 2015. But they punted that down the road. They and the PMA, the Pacific Maritime Association, punted that down the road. And now their contract has expired. And they're in the process of getting a renewed contract. They're going for everything you want, more money, less hours. But what they're fighting for largely is this issue of automation and whether or not they're going to be losing jobs. And it's been very tenacious fight between the ILWU and the PMA. And let's be clear, the PMA, the Pacific Maritime Association, is the ocean carriers. That's who that is. And what happens if railway workers go on strike and the West Coast, the 29 ports on the West Coast, decide to do the same thing? This is the PMA site, specifically their negotiation site. And you'll notice they're, excuse me, really trying to tout up, what West Coast workers are getting. They're getting nearly 195,000 annual wage, more than 95,000 in benefits, guaranteed 40 hours of work, total net economic input loss for every 1% of market share loss at the port of LA and Long Beach, 15.6 billion. They're kind of pointing the blame here at the ILWU because of issues with labor. That, listen, because of the reduction in labor of cargo coming in, this is what it's costing, the ports of LA and Long Beach, when in truth, this is an issue that's been long going before. Talk about direct jobs, all those elements at play. Same time, here's the ILWU website talking about their renegotiations. And again, they're pointing the blame kind of at the PMA, which the PMA is made up of those big ocean carriers and the shoreside operations. They're talking about the renegotiation. They're talking about what needs to be done, talking about a media spotlight, but more importantly, they're talking about worker risks and carrier profits. Again, carriers are making record profits, more profits in 2021, 2022 than they ever made back in the 2010s, the entire decade. And now they're talking about it. They're making this point. Ocean carriers generated record profits. According to the Maritime Research Group, Drewry, carriers have generated approximately $190 billion of annual profits, roughly triple that from the previous year. So they obviously the unions see some of that fruit of their labors for a time when their union wasn't getting pay raises during this time. Now, you can make the argument between unions and foreign companies all you want, but this issue is really paramount because what happens should the West Coast labor, in conjunction with the railways, go on strike? And understand, just one of those going on strike is cataclysmic. Both of them going on strike creates an even worse condition. And it's not because, again, we're not going to become lawless and people are going to be hunting around and killing each other for a loaf of bread. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about here, it's going to cause disruptions. And more importantly, every day it happens, it takes longer and longer to reset from that. And what that means for you is, can there be shortages? Yes, there can be shortages. We may see some things on the shelf go missing. Uh, but more importantly, what you're going to see is increased transportation costs once everything gets up and running again. That's why it's really paramount right now to prevent these strikes from happening. You don't want these strikes to happen because if these strikes happen, that causes the disruption. The government, the federal government, whatever you think, I don't care, Republican, Democrat, on both sides, Republican and Democrats should have been on top of this a long time ago. Again, railway workers have been in this situation for decades. This is not Democrat, it's not Republican, it's both administrations. And now we're seeing the labor secretary, Marty Walsh. We're seeing this presidential emergency board trying to fix the railway situation. We need to be fixing the railway situation. We need to be fixing the port situation. We need to get this done because anytime there's uncertainty, that even just the potential of strike causes disruption. It raises costs. It makes people wonder, why are people going to the East Coast with their cargo instead of going to LA and Long Beach? It's because there was doubt that there would be a strike starting in the second half of 2022. And the PMA points at the ILW points at the PMA. Well, it's both of you guys. You got to come to an agreement. You got to hammer it out. And I know this is, it's easy for me to sit there because I'm not involved in it. It's very easy, but there needs to be a negotiation because listen, you've got to go in and renegotiate at times. And the more you kick it down the road, the worse it comes during the renegotiation. If you let it sit for 7 years, which is what happened, it's more difficult now. And the PMA's got to accept, listen, you're at record profits. You have got to share some of those profits now at this point. At the same time with the ILW, there's got to be change. We've got to get the ports more productive, more efficient. We've got to become more automated in some ports. The LBCT terminal at Long Beach, TrayPack, those are the terminals that you need to look at for that. That means if you're going to start phasing out some workers, there needs to be exit plans for them. At the same time, you're going to need to bring new workers in because data is really important. So there is a lot going on here, but the absolute catastrophic scenario here is railway workers go on strike, West Coast union workers go on strike, and we have these kind of massive disruptions. Understand, we're going to see disruptions right now. We're slowing down trains. We're canceling trains right now. We're seeing cargo shift from the West Coast to the East Coast and the Gulf Coast. We're seeing the impacts of this already. The potential is it goes full bore. And listen, I don't want this. We need to come up with a clear solution, level heads. Let's get in there. Let's understand that everybody has claims that need to be done. Railway workers need a better agreement on quality of life. West Coast port workers, see an opportunity here for, the fact that they haven't been given, their raises like they should have been over this past 7 years. There's got to be a movement toward automation. We got to get U.S. ports more efficient at operating to be able to handle these things. They can't be ranked at the bottom like they are in some surveys. So there's a lot of issues at play here. And what we need is cool heads going in there, listening to both sides and coming up with reasonable mediation and compromise, which I know is a hard thing to sell. If you enjoyed today's video, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell so you'll be alerted about new videos as they come out. Leave a comment, share it across social media, give it a thumbs up, and if you can, contribute to the page, or else I'll go on strike. No, I'm kidding. I'm not going on strike. I would never go on strike. You can contribute to the page one of two ways. One, you can contribute right below with that super thanks button. Or second, you go over to Patreon, see the link at the very end of the video or in the show notes down below. Become a patron of the page, contribute to the page. It helps me support this page, keep this page up and running, and keep me in the Hawaiian shirts that I love so much. No, I'm kidding. Till our next video, Sal, signing off.